I guess we get going. So thanks very much for coming and attending. So today, myself, I'm Adrian O'Sullivan. I work for the Huawei Open Source Program Office. I'm joined here by Ray Fong, or people call Victor as well. You can call him Victor or Ray Fong. Today we're going to talk about a very important topic for us at the moment about keeping open, okay? So I'm going to start by playing a small little video to give you an idea of what we at Huawei feel about open source, and then we'll discuss about some of the things that are actually happening in the industry, in policy, that is affecting maybe the way that open source will be in the future, and something we as a community should look out for. So let's just start with a small little video.
The wisdom of nature is expressed not only by what can be seen, but what is deeply embedded within all things. A honeycomb is one of nature's most elegant structures, but emerges from the collective work of thousands of honeybees. So too, synergizing the contributions of each individual and achieving group wisdom through collaboration is the purpose of open source. We embrace open source, take part in it, and give back to it. Huawei cultivates core infrastructure software with an open source approach, shaping open source capabilities. From lines of code to open source projects, we build an open, shared, and collaborative open source community by leveraging basic software. With innovation, we create the driving force of an intelligent world.
So it's part of a longer video, but I'm going to pause it there because when I look about what is open and open source, and we look at what's actually happening today, I think we have to examine ourselves as well to say, well, what is really open source? There's a lot of talk, I've been involved as a leader between standards organizations, CEN, CENELEC. I sat as a leader within their business model between CEN, CENELEC, and open source solutions. And as I discovered in that role, there's a lot of different opinions about what is open source. And there's a lot of things that are happening here at the moment in Europe, both from a policy and a legislation perspective. So you might have seen plenty of material coming out from the Eclipse Foundation. Mike Milanovic has been very strong in the blogs that he's posted. Likewise, the Linux Foundation around the Cyber Resilience Act. So there's a lot of communities starting to wake up to seeing ways that are open source are being discussed and regulated for the future. So these are some things that we're going to have to keep an eye as a community to make sure and remain that truly open source remains open. And there's others. It's not just the Cyber Resilience Act. You're looking at things like the Product Liability Act. You have the directive, Product Liability Directive, and then you've also models where as a community, when you start working with open source, there's certain expectations about working with that open source. A lot of people expect that open source remains and stays the way it is, open and free for everyone to see forever and ever. And we've seen changes where even like things that, for example, with Red Hat recently, changing the way of the visibility, with CentOS Stream and the way, when do you get access to code? So again, there's changes that are happening in terms of what really is open source. And then from a commercial perspective, we've seen, for example, HashiCorp. We've had, a lot of people got used to Terraform and the tools and the base, and the expectation was that that's the way it will always remain. But things have changed. Some of these things are changing, for example, with the introduction of the business source license. Likewise, in the AI space, you have the Llama 2. Again, the OSI came out with a statement here that you can see. We have Carlo from the OSI as well, where, basically we have seen that, people are using the term open source and they're using it loosely without actually really understanding what really open source is. So we at Huawei are strongly believe in open source. And so when we look at, the projects and the type of projects to remain and keep things truly open, we looking at for example, the licensing. When you look at open source licensing, for me personally anyway, from a perspective of the licenses that you choose for your project, Basically, those that are actually approved by the OSI that match the open source definition are open source, right? There's certain freedoms that are there. They're listed very, very clearly on the open source definition, which is kept up to date and is the gate, you know, the reference model to making sure that your licensing is truly open. So one of the things you have to do to remain truly open, I think, is first look at the licensing models you're choosing, and also making sure that they're aligned, for example, with the open source definition. So that's one way of remaining truly open. But you can have open source license, okay? But then we've seen in the examples on the first slide, when I mentioned that sometimes you start the project and that project starts with an open source license, but that actual open source license may be controlled by one company, and then over the time they see that they want to change their business model, for example. So that then means that they can potentially relicense it. So one of the other things that are very important to keeping open is that you really have true open source governance. And I'm just giving you an example here with the, there's basically the Eclipse Foundation have been working very closely with the Open Atom Foundation in around setting up a governance model for two projects. So there's Open Harmony project, which is a project that is hosted and operated out of the Open Atom Foundation. And we have our own project that we're working here, and I'm a member of, you know, I'm on the steering committee of, which is the ONERO project at the Eclipse Foundation, which is taking and extending the Open Harmony code base. But you can only do that if you're following a set rules. And those set rules are very, very clear. For those that are actually well used to the governance model of the Eclipse Foundation, for example, we're following the development process. There is a specification process. There's the way that Eclipse specifications are done. And then there's also, we run a working group with ONERO. And again, there's a well-governed, vendor-neutral bylaws that are in there, processes about how you actually operate. So when you know and you take part in this type of ecosystem, you have that assurance that it's not just one company that is making those decisions. So if one company's business model changes, for example, it's the community and the bylaws still have to be respected, you know, so that the project can live on. You know, so this is one of the key elements of having a real strong governance model, having well-defined, you know, code must be open source, it must be royalty free, it must be a vendor neutral process. If you have this in place, then you as a small SME joining a project like this, you have a little bit of assurance that someone's not going to just pull the rug from it and basically change the licensing model without actually going through the rules that's set up by the governance model that is there. So just you mightn't have seen, I'm just going to go through a little bit about what we're actually doing in the ONERO project. So what we have here is, you'll see the base elements that we have. We're building off a strong and very large. Actually, Open Harmony is there's a Git is like GitHub in China. Open Harmony project is the #1 in China project at the moment on Git. And what we have here is, with this agreement with the Eclipse Foundation, we are actually working already with a lot of different additions that we are very strong at with making here with the local community. So we are expanding and working with local other projects, such as Canto, for example, with the the Eclipse Canto project. In terms of, if you go to our booth, you'll see a demo that is actually joint between the ONERO and the Canto team. We're now also looking to use open source IDEs, because you need to make sure that not only is your code open source, but how you actually develop and interact can be used with open source tooling. So that's very important that we're actually bringing in the TIA and starting to work with the TIA, Eclipse TIA project, in terms of how do we build up our IDEs. We have some of our partners are bringing some unique skills, you know, so we have, for example, the Servo project is coming in as a web engine that is working on top of the ONERO framework. We're also working very closely with enabling the React Native apps. There's a talk tomorrow by Software Mansion and Stefan, my colleague from Huawei. I'd highly recommend that you actually go and attend it. So these are some of the work that's ongoing, but also, as I said, all underneath the governance model of both the ONERO and the Open Harmony community. So by joining these communities, you're assured by the processes of those foundations, which is key. So when we look at, you can make contributions to keeping open. You can make them from being the big. So this is something that I was personally involved in, but it was done by Huawei as an organization. So Huawei is quite a big company. We have 195,000 employees. But when we're actually working and looking at the legislation that was coming out in terms of the Cyber Resilience Act, we together worked with our PACD office and came up with a response, because we felt it did justify a response. And I think that's something that is needed from not just our company, from every major company, from SMEs, from the community members themselves, because I think we're actually seeing that the way that open source is being legislated, it could potentially change create divisions and, geo divides based on the way that legislation is done here. I'm from Ireland, right? So I'm as a European. I would love to see that Europe is very, very strong in open source going forward forever. But when we have things like the legislators writing some legislation that don't fully understand how open source works, I think it's good as a community come back, and those kind of big responses isn't just from us. There was many companies. You'll see actually on the OSI, I think they listed out the top responses to the CRA as an example. So there's a lot of actually work going on to make sure that there's a strong response. But making sure that things start and open, stay open from a big, but I also go even to the small, right? So I've now changed roles. I'm no longer a developer, but once I was. So I'm just going back to my own personal experience of making sure that open stays open. It's getting involved. It's getting contributors contributing, continuing to new innovations. So this is just a small example from me, from a personal point of view, when I was actually last really as a developer, developing in 2019 on a project at ONAP. It's called the Open Network Automation Platform. And for me, that was my first, real love and joy. I spent from 15 to about 2019 working on that project. Made lots and lots of friends, learned about open source for the first time. And I fell in love with open source. And then that's when I applied for my current role to actually, because that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be actually working in communities such as you, the likes of you, right? So for me, from a personal basis, I have strong feelings about making sure that open source stays like it is, right? Because if we look at what we have today, any of your devices right now, it wouldn't be there without open source. And I think that's something that, the legislation that's going on, things like I mentioned earlier on, we also have the AI Act as well. And unfortunately, I start reading these and I see again open source mentioned in the AI Act. And what it's not doing is it's not taking into account individual people, okay? This could be me working for Huawei. This could be me as an individual. But we're all actually here together to actually make sure that we can work together and collaborate. And then we all have our own business models on top of it. And that's the way that open source has been for years, and that's the way it should remain, in my opinion. So, I think you might have seen it earlier on in that it flashed by in terms of the video. But Huawei, I'm very lucky to work with inside the Open Source Program Office. And we work with many foundations. So I'm delighted to be here at Eclipse and EclipseCon. And I hope you will actually come down. You'll see our booth. We have 2 projects there. I think Victor's going to talk about that in a minute. But I just want to show briefly some of the breadth of where we're actually involved and working with. So for us and for Huawei, open source is very strategic, very important. A lot of our products start and are based by shared innovation, working with you, working together to build communities. And then we all have, as I said, we mentioned, there's always a place then for putting your business models on top. But the business models should match, from the small to the medium. It could be a company with, and this goes back to a personal story. When I worked with Oniro in the Eclipse, what I really like about it is I sit on a steering committee, and even though we have 195,000 employees, we have another member that is working with us that has the exact same equal vote as us, Huawei. It's a good vendor-neutral process, and I think that's the way you actually get the best interaction, the best collaboration. That it's not always the biggest, company in the room has the the full power. It's the way that open source is run and truly keeping it truly open and truly participation. And when you involve foundations and you have those governance models that I mentioned earlier on, I think that's key to keeping this open, really open. So I'm going to switch presenters right now to Ray Fong to go through a little bit around business models and truly business.
Thanks, Adrian. And so I'm supposed to talk about business and today, so that's why I'm dressed like a businessman. So when we're talking about open source, we can see that a lot of companies, including us, are heavily participating into the open source communities. And we contribute our technologies and to make them open source, and we let the other companies to use our open source projects. But we usually tend to keep our business private. And to me, this is not truly open source. And true open source is not just about technology, but to create more business opportunities and to open the business to everybody within this ecosystem. And before I move on, I would like to ask a question. And there is an industry which is highly dependent on open source technologies, but many open source software companies don't like it. And anybody can give me the answer and which industry it would be? Yes. Huh? No, that's too far away for commercial and business model. Actually, what I'm thinking is the cloud industry. And the reason why software companies don't like it, there are several reasons behind that, and it's all about business. And first, when the cloud providers are using open source technology to build their infrastructure and to provide services, and they use open source softwares. But the software vendors can hardly benefit from their usage. And of course, they are running in the line, violating the open source software license. And so what about the software vendors provide services on top of the cloud? There comes new challenges. And because software vendors, they don't host cloud infrastructures by themselves, they don't have access to the core functionalities, they cannot provide native managed services on cloud, which means they can only provide services as images or SaaS. They will need to use independent accounting, billing, maintenance systems, which is not easy for end users, and which lowers the competitiveness of the cloud services provided by the software vendors, which means they are locked out of the cloud ecosystem. Still hard to get a benefit out of it. And if we can come to the next step, once the software vendor provided the service on top of a cloud, and it will require a lot of development cost. And once they have done that, it will be very hard for them to migrate from one cloud provider to another. And they have to pay the development cost again. And which means they have been locked in within this cloud provider. And all these reasons comes to a result. And the software vendors are hard to benefit, to design their business model, and to get revenue from the cloud ecosystem. And this situation needs to be changed. And that's why we need to move from open technology to open business. And here comes the Expanse project from our Open Services Cloud group, project group. And let's see how Open Services Cloud is addressing these problems that we have mentioned. So first, Open Services Cloud provided a mechanism, a set of standard process, and to enable cloud service portability. And by paying development cost for one time, and a software vendor can create their cloud service at one cloud provider. And once all the cloud providers are supporting this framework, they can migrate the service from one cloud to another without paying extra development cost, which would be much easier for the software vendors and to solve the locking problem. And also, Open Services Cloud provided a way to make the cloud providers to open up their core functionalities. And so the software vendors can use these functionalities to create their own managed service, providing similar user experience as those native services managed by a cloud provider, which wouldn't reduce the competitiveness of the native service from cloud provider, but enlarge the market and turn more software marketing into the cloud market. And earlier this year, there is an independent consultancy called Decision has made a study of the economic impact that Open Services Cloud projects will bring to the European cloud market. And one important result from the study is that for now, the yearly growth of European cloud market is only 40%. But with Open Services Cloud, it can increase to 279%. That's a tremendous increasement. And we can see the business value that Open Services Cloud project is bringing to the market and to the whole ecosystem. And we're going to listen to the opinion leaders and to see their comments on the Open Services Cloud provider.
Set of projects that directly relate and support the European initiatives for digital sovereignty. What do we do? What is our role in this? It's really to be the collaboration platform, the collaboration ecosystem, and to provide the open source governance for those projects.
Data neutrality is one of our core values, and I think it helps the community at the end of the day to have a level playing field for all members who would like to contribute to the work.
If you look very briefly, the idea of Open Services Cloud is to build a platform which goes in between the different cloud markets and the software or managed services layers. The promise that are brought by Open Services Cloud is first to be able to bring data and service interoperability, to really be able to deploy in a simple way in any cloud so that you remove the barrier of having to learn and keep up to date with all the complexity of each of the cloud solutions. And the second one is to be able to support capabilities without relocating your data from one cloud to the other.
Especially when looking at the whole Gaia X initiative, it's not only a European topic, there are already a lot of other countries that are showing a lot of interest in the initiative. So I think it's not only a European topic at all, and I think also especially looking at the digital world that is really interconnected on a global scale.
Why is the European Commission and the European Union heading in this direction? What are the problems that they see for kind of this economic area as a whole, for the 500 million citizens, etc.?
Okay, and if you guys are interested in both Onero and Open Source Services Cloud project, and don't forget to drop by our booth upstairs and to learn more information by talking with our expert at the booth. And also, here are the links for to get more information about these projects, and welcome to visit and know more. And thank you.
Thanks, Ray Fong. What I would like to also add is that the report that we just you saw the video there. We have copies of that report, hardbacks that are available at the booth. I'd highly love for you to take one away with us, or else I have to carry them all back with me. So make sure you go over and take a copy of each of the Unlock the Cloud report. Also, I just want to highlight as well tonight, the other project that we mentioned there was the Onero project. We have a BOF on tonight, so it's got a nice little prize as well. If you turn up at the BOF, there's a GT4 watch that is being given out to in a lucky draw. So again, and earbuds as well. So please come along to the BOF and attend and enjoy and listen to the conversations and talks of the experts that we have, including a number of demos. You'll see, hopefully when you do pass the booth, you'll see there's plenty of demos, both of Expanse. So we have a demo that's been run on Expanse. I see Swarup down below is going to be happy to go through that demo of Expanse to explain exactly what we're talking about when we talk about getting into actually being able to move your services from one cloud to another and accessing the internal APIs and really opening the business. I think I'm probably kind of running out of time, but what I want to do now is open the floor for questions or any comments, and I'm hoping that you enjoyed the talk. Anyone? Everyone shy? No.
Yeah, Adrian, thanks a lot for the interesting insight. May I play for a moment the devil's advocate here? You have an open source project, and it is being governed by the Eclipse Foundation, saying that, but ultimately isn't the power of the decision what will happen with this project, with this software, with the main contributor and not with the one who owns the government, to the government structure, or who's governing it. Meaning that if I contribute as a company and I pay developers and they contribute to 90% of the relevant code, and the next moment I say, well, it's not going to be open source anymore, isn't that actually the real deciding factor here, or what actually drives it?
That's a very, very good question, but the way I would say that is, one of the first things you look at with an open source project is trying to make sure there's good community health. So you want to have diversity in your community. But you do have projects, I do see that where, you have maybe a dominant player that is there that's doing most of the contributions. But I think one of the factors that you avoid is, like, for example, we just talked about earlier on about the HashiCorp decision, and OpenTofu had to start as a separate, foundation. You don't have that problem here, that if the dominant player comes, says, I'm going to take him back, I think every other contributor that is interested in that project, and you'll also find others that have been happy to sit back and watch the main contributor make all the contributions. The minute they find that they're gone, you might see that they step up to the plate, and all of a sudden your community help, your community diversity extends. And I think that's what we're seeing actually happening in that regard.
Because I happen to sit on the Eclipse board, I just wanted to add to Adrian's answer. So one of the important factors when you donate a project to the Eclipse Foundation is that the Eclipse Foundation owns the trademarks and IP around the project going forward. So even the donating company, if they continue to contribute all the code in the world, if they want to fork it, that's their right, because open source, anyone can fork it. but they can't even use the same name anymore. It's no longer their project. It belongs to the Eclipse Foundation. So that's the power of putting it under open governance, is that it's truly owned by a neutral third party. And even if you're the biggest contributor, of course you have the freedoms to do with it what you want, but the project itself is under shared ownership.
Yeah, it's actually another comment on the question. That I think the committer agreement right is essential, because you do not have the original contributor does not have the right to reassign the copyright or relicense, right? The Eclipse Foundation does, and there's a process for resolution for projects that are non-functional. And for example, with Terraform, or if you, let's say VS Code, you contribute a fix to VS Code, you assign all the rights to Microsoft. So they can do with that code whatever the fuck they want. Sorry. But not the case. That's why you need open governance. That's why you need a foundation instead of a single company owning the whole thing. Gives you more security.
I think we could start a debate and go here all night, but I'm not sure, are we okay for... We probably have time for one more question, do we? Or I'm looking back. No. All right, so I think we're out of time. So I really like your participation. I like the questions as well, because that's what we want. We want healthy debate. We want to have people ask those questions. But I do firmly believe, as was mentioned, I think putting it in foundations that have clear governance models is the way to make sure to keep things truly open. You want to have, the processes set up, the ability there to make sure that the community can continue, even if one, as you said, decides to leave, right? The community drives on. So with that, I thank you for your time. And as I said, please come to our booth and the BOF tonight at 7. Thanks very much.